Today we are going to talk about genetics in dogs and what we can learn from it. So I will start this presentation now. What you see here are some breed-specific metrics, and then you see Chihuahua, miniature poodle, Shetland sheepdog, and a bull terrier. So, for example, this is the Chihuahua breed, and this is the bull terrier breed, and then you see the total length of in megabytes of the different samples that they took. You see that there is quite some diversity, whereas, for example, the bull terrier there's very limited diversity. You see this also, if you look at the Chihuahua, you see that the shared homozygosity is low, 48.1, whereas, for example, in the bull terrier, the shared homozygosity is very high. And it gives you also insight that the bull terrier is much more inbred. And as a result, then they looked also at how many breeds they needed to give a good insight, and that you can see on the right side. See if I can go to the. I have to go to the. Next photo. It gives you. Let's reshare again. It gives you insight into the diversity in the dog world. So here it is. Now it is what I wanted to show. So you see here, for example, all the ancient types, like sled dogs, for example, here, but also the social breeds and some companion breeds as well. So I sneeze. For example, some of the Pekingese Asian types, then the European Spitzes, and also the companion dogs of Europe, for example, the pug dog. So, contrary to popular belief, this is not so much a miniature molosser, as many people say. Even in the Netherlands, where I'm from, they tell you that this is the Dutch Mastiff, which is just crazy. It's also crazy that they are now breeding this type of dog to the molosser breeds, because it gives a lot of trouble and it's completely not relevant. You see, for example, poodles, chihuahuas, terriers, different types. For example, the more of the Irish, Yorkshire, Scottish. The shepherd breeds are clustered here, as you can see, and also some breeds that are more of livestock protection breeds. You see, for example, the Commodore depicted, but they're also like Great Pyrenees and other breeds. You see running dogs, and those are the different type of running dogs as compared to the running dogs that you can see here. For example, the Greyhound and Whippet, the fastest running dogs are here depicted, close to the Irish Wolfhound. These are more the English breeds, and they're completely separated as compared to the breeds that are, for example, in the Arabic countries. You see more of a hound type of dogs. The Dachshund, for example, it has a terrier-like role. Dachshund means badger dog in German. Is completely separated from the terrier breeds that you see here. For example, the worked the terrier. For example, the worked fox and the badger. For example, Bedlington terrier is here. The Russell terrier is there. And then you see more of the water dogs, the Springer Spaniels, etc., that are also there for picking up quarry that has been shot, so more of a bundle, so to say, here are the water dogs. And it also includes the Newfoundlander. So that's also a funny thing. Huh? Newfoundland is often depicted as a Molosser type of breed that should be depicted here, St. Bernard and Mastiff, for example. But it's depicted in the classification more to the water dogs. So, for example, Labrador Retriever. You see again working dogs, but those are more of a working dog that is not only a hound type, but more of an all-rounder. So they're also separated, for example, from the foxhound and the beagle, etc. You see other working breeds. Those are more of Flanders origin. So, for example, you have a German Shepherd dog, and then you have the Malinois and the Poelendaler, and also more of the Dutch Shepherds. And those are far more related to, for example, the English breeds that you see here. It's also a funny thing. Yeah? So, geographically, the Netherlands, for example, and also Belgium are bordering to the German border where the German Shepherd dog originated. And then the Belgian and Dutch Shepherds are very closely related and are not so much related with, for example, this German Shepherd dog that can be found here, who's more related to the Bertha Picard, which is again a French breed. And also Belgium is also bordering the French border. So that's an interesting thing. And quite close to the greyhounds here that you see here. And also the Borzoi and Irish Wolfhound are a lot closer. This must be the Italian greyhound. I cannot see it there because the legs of the Groenendael dog were above it. So here you see the normal running dogs as well. So the greyhound is here, the whippet is here, but also some of the herding breeds. So the herding breeds of the United Kingdom are again not that much related to, for example, German Shepherd or the Belgian breeds. And they are closer to the Belgian breeds than they are to the German breeds, as you can see here. And also, for example, the sheepdogs, Australian Shepherd is also depicted more on this side. An Australian Shepherd is a breed developed in the United States. It was there to handle Australian cattle, but that's not the same. And then you see, for example, the Doberman close to the Schnauzers, and also the Rottweilers in the same family. It is quite normal because also the Rottweiler was used to create the Doberman Pinscher. And the Rottweiler is very close to those other breeds that you can see here, for example, the Molosses, starting with the Great Dane and the Cane Corso, which are more of a running type of Mastiff. And then they go to the real Mastiff, like Neapolitan, Bourbon, Bull Mastiff, etc. Also, then you have the normal Mastiff, and then the Bull Terriers come there. So, for example, the American Staffordshire Terrier, Staffordshire Bull Terrier, and even the Bull Terriers, and the English Bull Terriers. And the funny thing is that you see that here are the Bulldogs. And it could, of course, be that those terriers and Bulldogs were created out of Molosses originally. But you could imagine that the Bulldogs would be closer to the Molosser Mastiffs, or not, than those that took the Bull and Terrier origin. But it is not the case. And that's because in the Bulldogs, the current day Bulldogs, a lot of this type of blood, the pug blood, was interacted, which is more of a non-working breed. So the Bulldogs of the past look closer to the, for example, American Staffordshire Terrier, or even closer to the working version thereof, American Pit Bull Terrier, than the Bulldogs that you see here. The funny thing. Also, the Mastiff and the St. Bernard are quite interrelated when they were recreated, but they still have some space in between. Okay. The next slide. In this slide, you see that you have variation within the group. Variation is not that big. Within Sorry, I have to say it a little bit different. So within a breed, the variation is as limited as possible. Within a clade, there can also still be quite some variation. But even if you compare the clades all together, you see some variation. So what is also said is that single parents have interacted within different groups. So here you see, for example, that there's interaction between German Shepherd dog and, for example, the Belgian Shepherd breed, as you can see here. So that's interesting. Yeah. Earlier I told you they were separated in these clades, but on the other hand, they still have interaction because also now, for example, if you look at the crossbred Malinois, the working Malinois, oftentimes they also carry some German Shepherd blood. And the other way around, you can imagine that German Shepherd will only be improved by adding some more driven Shepherd blood. But also, there are other examples that are, as I mentioned, for example, the pug also had some interactions across many breeds. And you see that the popular breeds often have more thicker haplotype sharing. And also, for example, this Rottweiler breed has interactions all the way to this group you can see here clustered. It's more of a terrier interaction as well. So that's a funny thing, that even terriers and molosses are interacting. And also you see here, for example, that there are interactions between the Green Terrier breed and the terriers, depicted here. Again, here there's interaction. Also, always very interesting to look at this thing. An example you can see here. I'll try to make it bigger, but it's a little bit hard. So, for example, we start here. In time, you could see that the Norfolk and the Norwich Terrier are divided into separate breeds. So, what happened? You had one breed with tipped up ears and dropped ears, and then they separated them. You can see that here in the relationship that they have. This is a chi-square that gives you some insight on the correlation. The highest correlation would be 1. It's perfect correlation. You see that's very close to that line. It's a line that's depicted here. So that would, the Norfolk and Norwich Terriers, dividing them to separate breeds means that both breeds have a limited gene pool now, and they are now used for show purposes instead of really functioning dogs. Because if you want a functioning dog, it doesn't matter that much if their ears are tipped up or tipped down, as long as the dog works, of course. And you want to breed best to best. And now in the show world, we just, we can divide those two breeds from that one breed that it started with. Another example you see here is a good correlation that you see that your Eurasian breed, also known as Eurasia, has been developed from a show. And they started with the wolf chow, so to say, that they crossed chow with the wolf Spitz, which is a German Spitz breed, and therefore they also say German Spitz from Europe. Asian breeds like the show that's Eurasian, and after a while they also added the Samoyed to make it click a little bit more, and also easier in temperament, because especially the chow has a strong temperament, and Spitz types are very alert, and then you can imagine that you get a lot of overreaction for a show breed. As a worker breed, I can imagine if you do both the watchdog from Spitz and also the guardian instinct. And man-stopping ability of a chow, which is a relatively small breed, but very tenacious, even though it has been so long as a show breed. Also, you see that, for example, that they have recovery, recreational breeds. I also mentioned the St. Bernard and the Mastiff. But the Irish Wolfhound was recovered by a Deerhound outcross, and those are related breeds, as I showed you earlier. I'll show you here again. So here's the Scottish Deerhound, and here's the Irish Wolfhound. They're very related now. And also, for example, the German Wirehead pointer created from German Shorthair and Wirehead pointed griffon. So they created and mixed different working breeds to create another one. And also you see that in the Boston Terrier, there's blood of Bulldog, French Bulldog, and American Staffordshire Terrier. It wasn't American Staffordshire Terrier, it was the American Pitbull Terrier that they used there, but you get the point. American Staffordshire Terrier was again developed as a show breed from the working breed being the American Pitbull Terrier. So here you see also that, as I mentioned, there's a haplotype sharing, but it can be a good thing, but also a bad thing. For example, here they looked at the collie eye abnormality, which is an eye disease. So it started with this collie here. And then, of course, other collie breeds are also affected because there's crossbreeding between those working breeds, of course. So even across borders, like the American developed collies, such as the American Australian cattle dog. But also, for example, a more recent breed, such as the Chinook, is also affected. And breeds that are developed in the water dog division, such as Nova Scotia Bull Retriever, is affected as well. Even gun dogs, such as Boykin Spaniel, and they also make very small Spaniel types of dogs, and those are often again related to the pup, which is a show dog. And even some terriers also have some blood of the collie, but it could be due to gun dogs because the Airedale Terrier has some Otterhound blood. In my opinion, the Airedale Terrier is not a true terrier. It's a combination, a hybrid between hound, Otterhound, and terrier blood that increases the size. Also, a terrier in its serious definition would be a dog that is able to go to ground, because terrier means terrier comes from terra, which means earth. So here you see how you can build a dog, but let's first focus on the diversity within one species. And so this is a dog, a Harlequin Great Dane, and then you see a very small black Chihuahua dog next to it. It's all the same breed still. And then they have some physical differentiations, and then you can easily see that all those will be enormous between those two breeds. But also an important point is that the character of those specific breeds can be completely different. For example, the same size Bull Terrier will react completely different to the same size Shepherd breed. They're completely separate also mentally. This is not depicted here, but it's also harder to address. Here you see some examples. If you only look at a simple thing as fur, you can see that, for example, there are insertions in specific genes that have made the eyebrows that you can now see in the standard snout, but also other snout families, which are not there in other breeds which have similar length of coat. Also, that you can see that there are short-haired dogs like the Whippets, which is very effective for also losing the heat. If you want to perform, it's good that you can also exchange the heat to your environment, but also more of a show version, and you want to have extreme amounts of fur. And there can also be something in between. So, for example, fur helps not only for show purposes, but could also be of benefit to isolate the dog from the environment, that they retain the heat, giving better weather protection, so to say. But also within one breed, that is your both Portuguese water dog, you have some mutations that result that normal Portuguese water dog often has this more of a curly coat, and others have this more of a straight, less curly coat. You can see here. This is an example in small size dogs. They looked at scans, so they gave dog sedation and then added Röntgen equipment next to the dog, and they found out that there are quite some metrics to look at, and then they calculated all those sizes and they found linkages here. But also they have a ratio between small dog and a big dog. That's the most interesting part. So within small breeds there is a haplotype that is shared. So there's a unifying factor across all those small breeds, and that is also, of course, something that you can comprehend. Wolves are, of course, varying in size depending on the conditions a little bit, but they're still quite big. And those small dogs are completely the opposite in there. They also looked at SNPs, and the funny thing is, the most interesting thing, they looked at different markers then, and they see that those markers, those 6 markers, account for more than half of the variety in small body size. So they say small body size is less than 90 lbs, so that's in kilograms, so less than 40 kilograms. In my opinion, that's not a small body size again. But they found a very little variety in large breeds. If you look at those markers, so you only have 5% variety if you look at dog breeds higher than 90 lbs, so that's more than 40 kilograms. You can see this depicted here. Of course, you have to correct also for related nervous sex, because oftentimes a male dog is often bigger, even within the same breed, than a female dog. This, in my opinion, is more interesting as a heat map. What you see here are the weight range, so starting from 5 to 10 lbs, that is 2.2 to 4.5 kilograms, and ending here at the extreme of 145 to 150 lbs. So that's a little bit less than 70 kilograms in top. And what you see then here is that look at the small size, you see that it's particularly orange on those markers. These markers, especially these 6 markers. And then if you go up, especially above a certain weight, especially here or here, you see that one sea of yellow. So you see that those are not that relevant here. But interesting, those other 2 markers that you see here, they were almost not present in the small breed. But they're gaining tremendously. You see those increase in the color towards red, an extreme overexpression here in those giant breeds. As I say, they have a large breeds and sort of medium breeds. Then they have a strongly associated with a heavy muscle phenotype, which is associated with obesity in humans. This is true also, please keep in mind that if you have a very muscular dog, and I will come back to this later, you have a bigger chance of getting an obese dog. Back fat thickness and muscle is important in the bulky phenotype. I will come back to this later. Is this really that important for a strong dog? And also, this is more of a relationship with obesity and diabetes, etc. And the ability to synthesize lipids and fats, and also degrade them. I was telling you though that we'll come back to this later. You see, for example, that the fatty back, it was first found in pigs. Do you want your dog to look like a pig? You see that that's what's happening. You look at those, for example, those bulldogs. Of course, they are nice and soft, and they have a lot of bulk. But is it that functional or different functional? This is more of a pet dog type of dog. Also, a pig doesn't have to perform; it only has to produce meat, and don't get ill that easily. And also, if you look at the bigger breeds, you see the differentiation between the bulky breeds and the non-bulky breeds. So these are often in literature, you see that they are dogs that are called running mastiffs, more of a Great Dane type, and more of the big mastiffs. So those big mastiffs were not that suitable for really catching anything because they don't simply lack the speed. They are just there to defend. And of course, with all that mass, they have a better mental capability. But even a Great Dane, because its size is that big, has enough mass to handle almost any man. So I really like this set a lot more. Problem with the big Dane is that they have put in so much emphasis on getting the height as much as possible. That they've forgone a lot of other factors, and that introduce also hip dysplasia to a great extent. But all this weight and also increased height is even worse. This is also an interesting factor. Of course, all dogs started as a wolf, and you see those three things they look at. These are markers for small breeds. You see that, for example, a bulldog, English bulldog has that marker, but also, of course, smaller breeds like miniature pinscher. Here you have a muscle allele, which is also found in the English bulldog, and also in the Great Dane and in the normal mastiff. But then if you have both, also the bulky allele, you see that you have enormous weight. That's also why these dogs can weigh that much. Even worse, the fattest dog or the dog that weighs the most is an English Mastiff. So that's interesting. And you see that they have muscle breeds. It would be interesting as well to look at a small dog that is extremely muscular. For example, in my opinion, that has enormous muscle mass for its size. And I think it would have at least this muscle there as well. And also some of those miniature pinchers can be quite muscular. And even more so than, for example, this Great Dane. If you look at the height to muscle ratio, I can imagine if you replace a Pepper terrier, it would have more muscles to the height of the weight than this Great Dane, in my opinion. Also, this is a picture that shows you a little bit of the deformities. In this case, chondroblast dysplasia. I'll give you an example here. So here you see two Labrador pups. The black one was normal, and the light colored one, the yellow one, is abnormal. You see also the abnormal bone structure, which this one has the normal bone structure belonging to the black one. And that's in a breed that is not chondroplastic. But if you look at this picture, you see that, for example, in the Shepherd breeds, you have the Sheltie that has this problem. Also some terrier breeds, a Scottish Terrier, for example. But can also be in this very small companion dogs, all kinds of dogs, even in Chihuahua you find it. Some of the hounds also have this type of breed, what they call basset hounds. And that could also, those abnormalities could spread everywhere. And it could also indicate it's quite an ancient, because those dog breeds, they are completely separated, often in purpose, but they still carry this gene. So here, those dog breeds are all quite recent, in the forms that we know them now as show dog, or it's quite an ancient marker. If you look at diseases in dogs, this is something that's interesting. You see that these are the top 10 of diseases in dogs. The cancer is the top. So if you look at focus on cancer, then you see that there are breed-specific elevated risk of cancer. For example, osteosarcoma has more of the English brackets that you saw, so the deerhounds, the wolfhounds, more of the mastiff type of dog, also the Rottweilers, which are also molluscan. And bladder cancer are more in certain types of terriers, but also some sheepdogs. And so other sarcoma are really deadly, and they are covering beneath mountain of the fat-coated retrievers. And they in those breeds, the most important cause of death are very often, whereas gastric cancers are often found in Belgian breeds, such as the Belgian Shepherd dog, but also in Shelties. Very interesting. Here you see an example of German Shepherd breed. Let's start here. So if you have a German Shepherd, you have an autosomal dominant form of kidney cancer. You have to observe it in an early phase, otherwise you will be in big trouble and you cannot do anything anymore. You see that they have pedigrees, and they could work through the pedigree, and then found out that this dog, this limited pedigree that you see here, was the one that contributed to all those cancers. And it could be that you have genetic predisposition to develop this type of cancer, and then the dog should just carry it, for example. And once those dogs are coming together again, then you get a lot of trouble. Or sometimes, in this case, if it's more of a dominant type, then it could be that half of it gets it, and the other half doesn't. Also, I mentioned the invasive bladder in dogs, especially in terriers. You can find this. For example, the Scottish terrier is an extremely elevated risk, and then it dilutes a little bit more down if you look at the other types. There's also a relationship between genetic predisposition, so that you have a high chance of getting a certain type of cancer, and the breed. Because the breed consists of a specific set of genes that is more susceptible to this type of disease. This is a very worrisome development, but it has been there for quite a while, so that could also temper your worries a little bit. But it's something about a canine transmissible tumor. So what this means is that when there are interaction between the two dogs, in this case sexual intercourse, the cells of the one dog are transferred to the other dog, and then the other dog also has those cells and can develop this type of cancer. And the thing is, it's a universal phenomenon, so to say. It's very old, as you can see in the second bullet. The first bullet also mentioned what I mentioned before, it's sexually transmissible. And the last bullet is very interesting because all those canine transmissible venereal tumors, complete sentence there, CTVT, share genetic identity. So is there one source, so to say? And that could be, here's more an hypothesis. Then they have a modern tumor, and they say, is it there that across those thousands of years there was one founder? So it started with a dog in Brazil, an American Cocker Spaniel, if I see it correctly, and they found a dog in Australia. And they mention an Australian cattle dog, which is Australian breed, but later on they just say that's a local dog. And they isolated the tumor, so they had the cells, and then they looked at the cells and they found out they are very close. And then they compared it to all the genes of the breeds that they were there, and these genes that they found in the tumor were not the same genes of the breed that they found them in. For example, that English Native American Cocker Spaniel and the farmer dog. And then they, as you already see it, these genes of breast cancer were very close to the Asian and slapdog type of dogs, which you often see here. So they're closest resembling that of the Siberian Husky, the modern version of their dog. And here you see the Cocker Spaniel, as I mentioned, and the village dog. So it was also a village dog that they found, and not specifically an Australian cattle dog. So that's what I wanted to tell you today. I hope this was interesting to you, and to the next time. Bye bye. Oh, if you want to, please subscribe. It helps the channel. Let's see how I can stop recording. Now I will. Bye bye.